a big year for Wayforward, both in terms of the amount of releases they had, and the franchises they were given to work with. Having already gone over 2 of their licensed games with Thor God of Thunder and Aliens Infestation, as well as their obscenely original IP, Mighty Milky Way, today we'll tackle perhaps the biggest of their many releases during 2011, Bloodrayne Betrayal. Well, I say big. Betrayal's grandiosity comes more from its choice of platform than the series it belongs to, spanning 2 games, neither of which were critical darlings, and 4 awful Uwe Boll movies, 2 of which came out the same year as Betrayal. The Bloodrayne series is more well known for its main character's potential plagiarism than it is for the games and films she starred in. No, Betrayal is more noteworthy for being one of Wayforward's home console ventures, as they tend to stick to developing games on handheld platforms. In more recent times, with the rise of digital distribution opening up a cheaper alternative to release their works, Wayforward has taken on a greater number of console projects than ever before, including the aforementioned Bloodrayne Betrayal, which released on Xbox Live and PlayStation Network in September of 2011, with the PC version arriving roughly 3 years later. When originally launched, Betrayal was given quite a mixed bag of praise and critical mauling. Colin Moriarty praised it for, and I quote, "totes solid gameplay." You had to choose totes. While Jim Sterling unleashed a flurry of furious bashes, calling the game, as a Bloodrayne fan, a stab in the back, and later placing it on his list of worst games of 2011.
The controls are balls, Rain handles like an RC car, and Wayforward relied on throwing an obscene amount of enemies at the player rather than, actually designing a game. It's a shame because I'd waited years for a new Bloodrayne game, only to get this pile of fucking shit.
Wow. When you consider that was a list with Call of Juarez the Cartel and Lucha Fury, and Bloodrayne Betrayal ranks even higher than those games, you have to wonder, is this game really that bad? Well, if my reaction from the last review didn't make that clear, let's find out.
Once again, we're going to be taking a look at the PC port, once again done by Abstraction Games, albeit one that had to be reinstalled because it would simply crash the first time it was installed. If that sounds like a bad sign, that's because it is. Bloodrayne Betrayal is your standard beat-em-up, with rain hacking and blast away at the various creatures of the night, save with the inclusion of a scoring system. Not like a scoreboard like they would... Okay, whenever you beat a level, you're evaluated based on your timing, technique, and remaining health. And it's about time we got on the complaint train. Some might argue that this title is clearly meant to emulate that good old arcade sensibility one might find in the late 80s, while modernizing aspects like a scoreboard with the aforementioned scores for individual levels. That is meant to be a test of skill, and see how quick you can beat each level with as minimal time and damage taken as possible. However, there are 3 problems with that argument. One, as will be delved into more in a moment, there's some questionably un-arcade-like design choices that slow down the overall speed of the game, like puzzles and an absurd heaping horde of foes to face.
2, if this was meant to be a test of skill and speed, why is there not the option to restart the level like Wayforward's other games that place an importance on completion time or technique? Simple question.
Third, and most importantly, most of those arcade games that it may have been inspired from are perfect examples of horribly designed messes meant to suck out as many quarters as possible by unfair and cheap design. And if Bloodrayne Betrayal is trying to emulate that, well, it does a bang-up job of getting me incredibly infuriated. Quite simply, no! Bloodrayne Betrayal is not one of Wayforward's arcade throwbacks like Triple Dragon Neon or Batman the Brave and the Bold, mostly because the game seems to be confused about what it's trying to be. Some have called it an unofficial Castlevania game due to Wayforward's prior work with Konami and the overall gothic aesthetic. But in terms of modern Castlevania, i.e. an emphasis on exploration and grabbing the necessary piece of equipment or skill to gain access to the new area, the only objects that can be collected are skulls and a second gun, with the gun being automatically acquired and the skulls being easy to find due to how little exploration there is to be found in the entire game. And the only benefit that they bring is by giving a slight boost to their health or ammo for finding 5 of them. Helpful as these bonuses may be, it doesn't come close to injecting the same blood type as Castlevania into Rain's veins. It definitely doesn't do right, but the arcade games and its defenders will no doubt say inspired it, with how easy it is to exploit the enemy AI, with a simple strategy of stunning them with a single attack and sucking their blood. Sure, you might not get a great score for doing this, but there's no reason to achieve one when an S rank yields no worthwhile results. The ranking is superficial to the overall game, with no real inclusion other than to give the surface level impression that the game seems more like an 80s quarter pumper, complete with cheap deaths and even shoddier design. This is putting aside how enjoyable modern beat-em-ups like Castle Crashers or Dragon's Crown boast combo with more depth to it than Final Fight because it's not 1989 anymore. one might have been motivated to return and hone their skills in these levels where they're better designed, or the combat less shallow than a leaky sink, whose drain is so thoroughly clogged with garbage that a tiny puddle has built up over the past few days of it dripping down the drain. While options like exploding enemies, 2 different guns, and stomping on enemies' faces when they're down might confuse one into thinking that there's some depth to the way one can take out the largely same set of foes, these methods lack the same practicality found by simply spamming the aforementioned stun and set strategy, especially since the latter action of the two temporarily makes you invulnerable from enemy attacks, which, considering how many enemies can be on screen at once, is a necessary breather. It's the same problem with the Assassin's Creed games and their ever-increasing amount of bombs and other weaponry. Yes, some might be useful in specific situations, but overall you're probably going to stick with 1 or 2 of them because those ones are the ones that work for disposing of enemies.
What Betrayal is most definitely not is a Bloodrayne game, because at least in previous entries, Rain had a personality. In Betrayal, she's reduced to a boring redhead whose most notable feature is carrying around huge blades, which is shocking considering how much character Wayforward has injected into previous protagonists, most notably with Shantae.
For those wondering why the story hasn't been brought up at this point, it's because it's about as much of a non-present, impact-lacking set of scenes as one would expect from a title with such a personality-lacking lady. To return to the gargantuan garbage heap of an excuse for gameplay, the one bit of backhanded praise that can be granted is how the excruciatingly high number of enemies comes to resembling the quarter-pumping days of the arcade, in that it's every bit as cheap and unfair as it was to fill the screen with dozens of foes that force a player to waste their allowance back then than it was in 2011, complete with enemies you can't see hitting you from off-screen. These massive hordes were also a problem in Thor: God of Thunder, but at least that game had an authentic and occasionally amusing, if utterly wasted, combat system to dispose of them. Not only does Rain's rancid combat only bring down what would have been these mundane at best encounters, the amount you're forced to fight in comparison to Thor is excessive. Fighting 50 foes or so in one go, that becomes increasingly frustrating to frantically run from one side to the next and draining their life away to prevent Rains from being snuffed out, not helped by some frequently floaty controls or the incredibly small frame of invulnerability that Rain is given, although this is somewhat mitigated by the absolutely moronic AI. I mean no exaggeration when I say this. Bloodrayne Betrayal has some of the worst enemy AI I have ever seen, either standing around when Rain is no longer in reach, or actively seeking to end their lives by running right into natural hazards, as natural as a spinning blade in a castle can be at least. However, don't mistake Bloodrayne's Betrayal brain-dead enemies for making the game easy. Easier than it would have been, sure, but easy? It has an immensely sharp spike in difficulty during the first few bosses and the final few levels, the latter of which becomes particularly obnoxious, where one single screw-up means having to fight or fly through a given area all over again for the 50th try, and how many more of these gears do I have to get past? How many mummies do I have to beat before this nightmare ends? These poorly designed areas, the dreadful controls, and the anger-reducing length between checkpoints artificially pads out what is a relatively short game with little replayability to be found beyond suffering any additional attempts to garner an S rank.
And not even getting into how spiteful the final boss is. I don't necessarily mean with the attack patterns or the like, although that part is just so much fun. What I mean is that after you finally beat him, he attacks you one last time a la Rondo of Blood, but without any indication that this is a part of the gameplay because it presents itself like a cutscene. Like the one that preceded this fight. I don't like this game very much.
On top of all those obtuse design choices, the game thought throwing in periodic puzzles that involve tossing or blowing up an enemy before going on to the next area would be a good idea. It is every bit as inorganic as it sounds, with these sections slowing down an already sluggish game to a standstill with how infuriatingly long they can take to pull off, yet again adding to how confused the cobbling of ideas reveals itself to be.
So, remember at the beginning of the week of Wayforward when I said that even in their worst games, the presentation tends to mark a high point? Yeah, consider Bloodrayne Betrayal to be the exception because it's too high. It's not very appealing.
While by no means awful looking or anywhere near as bad as the gameplay, Bloodrayne Betrayal's visuals are a dizzying mess with zero cohesiveness. There are these largely detailed backgrounds featured throughout the 15 levels, but the characters that occupy them look more like they belong in one of Ubisoft's artsier games than they do a cult horror classic. At least they would if the animation wasn't as stiff, nor the choice in colors so simplistic, with the cheesy blood effects and muddy assets completing this crude package. Admittedly, the latter of these can be attributed to Abstraction's less than impressive porting prowess, but there is no excuse for sections that confuse stylized and detailed with has good art direction. There's an earlier section which aims for a highly stylized aesthetic, but the end result is a poorly presented mess, where it's impossible to tell which character is who when the foreground and back cover them up. In a later level, there's a portion where you have to hit a series of switches in order to disable lasers in order to progress. Problem is, the switches blend into the background, making it hard to tell where they're supposed to be, which only adds to the overall frustration. The only positive to be found is with the soundtrack. Kaufman's contribution delivers a solid mix of metal tunes, but they beg to be included in a better game.
It is hard to rein in the sheer amount of disappointment and contempt that this bloody frustrating game has awoken from within. I tried. I really did try to give this game a fair shot, and while it is far from the worst game I've ever reviewed, it is easily the weakest game that Wayforward released in 2011, and certainly is a poor note for the Bloodrayne series to go out on.
Originally, Logisco had a 3DS entry in the series planned called Bloodrayne the Shroud. However, that game was put on hold in 2011, with no new information surfacing in the 5 years since its announcement. While it's not impossible for the Shroud to resurface, considering that this is the year where Owlboy, Edge of Twilight, The Last Guardian, and Final Fantasy Versus 13 have or will be released in some capacity, it's unlikely that the title will ever see the light of day, let alone for a new Bloodrayne entry to appear anytime soon.
Honestly, the most disappointing part about all of this is that the final one that we were left with was this one. Just 2 more days. What do we have in store for tomorrow? Oh, that'll be a relief. Until then, game on, my friends.